The ceremony at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado unfolded with the precision of a military operation, each movement choreographed, each word weighted with tradition. Rows of families sat beneath the California sun, cameras ready, hearts full, watching their sons become something more than men. Among them sat a woman in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a simple navy blazer over jeans. She held no camera. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlaced, posture straight but not rigid. The kind of posture that came from muscle memory rather than effort. She watched the formation with eyes that tracked movement the way most people breathed, unconsciously cataloging angles and positions. Her name was Alina Kovic, and she had driven 7 hours from Tucson to watch her son receive his trident. The graduating class stood at attention as Rear Admiral James Kavanaugh took the podium. He was a legend in the SEAL community, a man whose face had appeared in classified briefings more often than public ceremonies. His voice carried across the crowd without amplification, decades of command presence condensed into syllables. He spoke about sacrifice, about the brotherhood forged in impossible places, about the weight of the trident each man would pin to his chest. Standard speech. Expected words. Then his eyes swept the crowd, and something changed. He stopped mid-sentence. His gaze locked onto Alina in the third row, specifically onto her left forearm where her blazer sleeve had ridden up slightly. The tattoo there was small, faded, barely visible from the stage, but Kavanaugh's eyes narrowed like a man spotting enemy movement through thermal optics. The pause stretched just long enough to be noticeable. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Alina felt the weight of his stare and instinctively pulled her sleeve down, but not before Kavanaugh saw what he needed to see. A small anchor wrapped in barbed wire with numbers beneath it. Unit numbers. Operation numbers. Numbers that officially didn't exist. Kavanaugh recovered smoothly, continued his speech, but his delivery had changed. After the ceremony concluded, as families flooded the field to embrace their newly minted seals, Alina stood to leave. She had planned to congratulate her son quickly, avoid the crowd, drive back before dark. She made it 3 steps before a hand touched her shoulder. Not rough, but firm. Military firm. She turned to find Kavanaugh standing there, 2 security personnel flanking him at a respectful distance. His face was unreadable, the kind of blank slate senior officers wore when they'd seen things that classified briefings couldn't capture. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice barely audible over the celebration around them, "I need 5 minutes of your time." It wasn't a request. Alina glanced toward her son, who was surrounded by teammates, laughing, alive with the joy of achievement. She looked back at Kavanaugh and nodded once. They walked toward the edge of the field, away from the crowd, toward a section of fence that overlooked the ocean. The Admiral stopped, turned to face her fully, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with rank. "Viper 16, he said. "Somalia, 2007. Alina's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Recognition, acknowledgement. The kind of look that passed between people who'd seen the same darkness. She said nothing. Kavanaugh continued, his voice lower now, almost reverent. "I was the ground commander for Operation Mongoose Fury. We were pinned down for 11 hours in Kismayo. Air support couldn't get clearance. Rules of engagement were a nightmare. We lost 4 good men in the first hour, had another 6 wounded. Command kept telling us to hold position, that fast movers were inbound, but nothing came. Nothing except you." The ocean wind picked up, carrying salt and memory. Alina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Kavanaugh's eyes never left hers. "You came in so low our guys thought you were going to auger into the street. A tin Warthog alone, no wingman, flying through a sandstorm with visibility near zero. You made 3 gun runs that saved 17 American lives. When you left, half your tail section was shot to hell. Tower told you to divert to a carrier for emergency landing. You refused. Said you had fuel for one more pass and there were still friendlies in contact. You made that pass, then limped back to Djibouti on one engine." Alina's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but steady. "You have me confused with someone else, Admiral. I was a logistics officer, never saw combat." The lie was smooth, practiced, the kind of lie that had been told in debriefings and security clearances for 16 years. Kavanaugh smiled, a thin expression that held no humor. The official record says Viper 16 was Captain Marcus Webb. I've read that report 100 times. I also know bullshit when I smell it. Webb was a good pilot, but he wasn't in that cockpit over Kismayo. You were. People moved around them, families laughing, new SEALs posing for photos, the normal chaos of celebration. But in this small pocket of space, two people stood locked in a conversation that belonged to a different world. Alina looked out at the ocean, at the gray-blue water that stretched toward a horizon she'd once crossed in aircraft that officially didn't fly missions that officially didn't happen. "If you know," she said slowly, "then you also know I can't talk about it. Not here. Not ever." Kavanaugh nodded. "I'm not asking you to break classification. I'm asking you to accept my gratitude. I'm asking you to let me buy you a coffee and tell you what happened to the men you saved that day. Some of them are here. Some of them trained your son. He doesn't know it, but he grew up to be like his mother in ways he can't begin to understand." Alina turned back to face him, and for the first time something like emotion flickered across her features. "My son thinks I pushed papers for 20 years. He thinks his father was the warrior in the family. I'd like to keep it that way." Kavanaugh's expression softened. "Your husband was Colonel Dmitry Kovich. Died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan 2012. Training mission that went wrong, except it wasn't training and the crash wasn't an accident. I knew him. Good man. Better officer." The words hung between them like unexploded ordnance. Alina's hands, still at her sides, curled into fists so tight her knuckles went white. "You're well informed, Admiral." Her voice carried an edge now, something sharp beneath the control. Kavanaugh didn't flinch. "I'm informed because I make it my business to know the people who have bled for this country in ways the country will never acknowledge. Your husband flew missions into places we're not supposed to operate. You flew close air support for operations that don't exist in any official record. You both paid prices that no medal will ever reflect." A seagull cried overhead, sharp and piercing. Alina watched it wheel away toward the water. "So what do you want, Admiral? Confirmation? Confession?" "I've got nothing to give you except the same answer I'd give any official inquiry. I was logistics. I pushed papers. I signed supply orders. The tattoo is just ink I got in a bar when I was young and stupid." Kavanaugh reached into his pocket, pulled out a small leather case, opened it. Inside was a photograph, creased and faded. It showed a man in desert fatigues, arm around a younger Kavanaugh, both of them grinning despite the exhaustion in their eyes. Behind them, barely visible in the background, was an A-10 Warthog with distinctive tail damage. "This was taken 12 hours after you pulled us out," Kavanaugh said. "The man next to me is Master Sergeant David Hernandez. He was hit 3 times during the initial ambush. Femoral artery nicked. He was bleeding out when you made your first gun run. The insurgents scattered long enough for our medic to get him stabilized. David lived because of you. He went on to serve another 10 years. Retired, married, has 3 kids now. One of them is in that crowd right now, graduating with your son." Alina stared at the photograph. Her breathing had changed, slightly faster, the kind of physiological response that training could suppress but never eliminate entirely. "You can't possibly know," Kavanaugh cut her off gently. "David described you. Well, he described your flying. Said whoever was in that cockpit flew like they were born in the sky and were just visiting Earth between missions. Said the gun runs were so precise, so perfectly timed, that it felt like the pilot could see through walls. He said it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he'd ever witnessed. Those were his exact words." Alina closed her eyes for a moment, a brief surrender to memory. When she opened them again, they were wet but no tears fell. "The after-action report for that operation is sealed for 75 years. How do you know any of this?" Kavanaugh's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because I wrote that report, and I lied in it. I lied because I was ordered to lie, because the mission was illegal under international law, because acknowledging what really happened would have created a diplomatic nightmare. I put Webb's name in the pilot slot because he was willing to take the credit for something he didn't do. But I've carried the weight of that lie for 16 years, and today I saw that tattoo on your arm and I knew. The ceremony field was beginning to empty now, families drifting toward parking lots, restaurants, hotels. The newly minted seals lingered, soaking in the moment, their tridents catching the afternoon sun. Alina watched her son, tall and proud, everything she'd hoped he would become. "He can never know," she said finally. "Whatever you think you know about me, about what I did, it stays buried. My son believes his father was the hero. He needs that." Kavanaugh nodded slowly. "I understand, but answer me one question and then I'll never bring this up again. Why did you come back for that fourth pass? You were damaged, low on fuel, and command had already cleared you to RTB. You could have left with honor intact. Why did you risk it?" Alina's gaze remained fixed on her son. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decisions made in seconds that echoed through lifetimes. "Because I heard David screaming over the radio. I heard him telling someone named Maria that he loved her, that he was sorry. I knew what that meant. I've heard men say goodbye before. I couldn't leave with that voice in my headset." The Admiral's composure cracked slightly, a brief glimpse of emotion before discipline reasserted itself. "Maria is his wife. They've been married 6 months when that happened. She's here today too, watching their daughter graduate." Alina nodded slowly, processing this information, adding it to the weight she already carried. "Good, I'm glad he got to have that life." Kavanaugh stepped closer, voice intense now, urgent. "You understand what I'm telling you. You didn't just save his life. You saved his marriage, his future children, everything that came after. Multiply that by 17 men, by all the families and futures connected to them, and you begin to understand the magnitude of what you did." Alina's laugh was short, bitter. "I understand military math, Admiral. I also understand that officially I wasn't there. Webb got a Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission. I got a transfer to a training squadron and a polite suggestion that I not apply for any more combat deployments. The Air Force made it very clear that my services were appreciated, but my continued presence in theater was inconvenient. So I flew trainers for 8 years until my 20 was up. Then I retired to Tucson and got a job teaching high school physics. That's the life I chose, or the life that was chosen for me. Either way, it's the life I have." Kavanaugh's jaw tightened. "That's not justice. That's not how this is supposed to work." Alina met his eyes directly, and in that moment she looked every bit the combat veteran she claimed not to be. "Justice is a luxury, Admiral. We both know that. The men who make it home don't get justice. They get to keep breathing, and if they're lucky, they get to watch their kids grow up. I got lucky. David Hernandez got lucky. You got lucky. The 4 men who didn't make it that day, they're the ones who deserve justice, and they'll never get it. So don't talk to me about what's fair." The rebuke was gentle but firm, delivered with the authority of someone who'd made peace with hard truths. Kavanaugh absorbed it, nodded once. "You're right, I apologize." He glanced toward the crowd, then back to Alina. "Your son is exceptional, by the way. Top of his class in close quarters combat, expert marksman, scored highest in his group on land navigation. His instructors say he has situational awareness that borders on prescient. Wonder where he gets that from." Alina allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine expression since the conversation began. "His father was special operations. He grew up hearing stories about courage and duty. He wanted to be like Dmitri." Kavanaugh studied her carefully. "And he wanted to make you proud. You know that, right? He talks about you constantly. Tells everyone his mom was in the Air Force, that she taught him about physics and engineering, that she's the smartest person he knows. He has no idea about the other part, but he reveres you anyway." The words landed like ordnance on target. Alina's composure wavered and she looked away quickly, blinking hard. "He's a good kid. Man now, he's a good man." Kavanaugh let the silence hold for a moment, then spoke again, his tone shifting to something more formal. "I'm hosting a small reception tonight, private gathering, just some of the command staff and a few family members. I'd like you to attend. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Alina shook her head. "I appreciate the offer, but I should get back on the road. Long drive home." The Admiral's expression suggested he'd expected this response. The someone I want you to meet is Brigadier General Catherine Marsh. She's currently overseeing a program at Nellie's that's recruiting former combat pilots for specialized training roles. They're looking for people with unique skill sets, people who can teach the next generation how to survive what we're sending them into. It's not combat, but it's important work, and it pays considerably better than teaching high school physics. Elena's attention sharpened. I'm retired, Admiral. My clearances are expired, and as we've established, my service record is unremarkable. Kavanaugh smiled, and this time there was something knowing in it. Your clearances were never actually expired. They were suspended pending reassignment. As for your service record, General Marsh has access to documentation that goes deeper than the official files. She knows exactly who you are and what you've done. She's been looking for someone like you for 6 months. I promised her I'd at least get you in the same room. Elena started to object, but Kavanaugh raised a hand. Just come tonight. Have a conversation. If you're not interested, you drive home tomorrow and we never speak of this again. But give yourself the chance to hear what she has to say. You've spent 16 years hiding what you're capable of. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. The words struck deeper than Elena wanted to admit. She looked toward her son again, saw him laughing with his new teammates, the trident on his chest catching light. He looked happy, complete. She thought about driving back to Tucson, back to the small house and the high school classroom, back to lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences and the quiet life she'd built from the wreckage of her real career. She thought about Dimitri, about the classified funeral at Arlington where half the mourners had names she was never allowed to know. She thought about the cockpit of an A-10, about the feeling of flight, about the weight of responsibility and the clarity that came with it. What time? She asked finally. Kavanaugh's smile widened. 1900 hours, officers' club, dress is business casual. I'll make sure your son gets the information. Tell him you're attending a reception for families of distinguished graduates. It's not entirely untrue. His father was posthumously awarded honors that are still classified. Your family of the distinguished, even if the recognition came in ways that will never be public. Elena nodded slowly, feeling the current of her life shifting, old paths reopening. I'll think about it. But they both knew she would go. Kavanaugh could see it in the way her posture had changed, the way her eyes had refocused. He'd seen that look before in operators who'd been out of the field too long, who'd convinced themselves they were done but who still scanned rooftops and calculated angles without thinking. Good, he said simply. I think you'll find it worthwhile. And Elena, he used her first name deliberately, establishing connection rather than hierarchy. Thank you for Kiss Me-O. For everything you did that day and all the other days that no one will ever know about. From me, from David Hernandez, from everyone who made it home because you were in that cockpit. Thank you. Elena's throat tightened. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. Kavanaugh extended his hand and she shook it, the grip firm and brief. Then he walked away back toward the ceremony field, leaving Elena standing by the fence overlooking the Pacific. She stayed there for several minutes, watching the waves, feeling the wind, letting her breathing return to normal. Finally, she turned and walked toward her son, who saw her approaching and broke into a wide grin. Mom, you made it. He swept her into a hug, lifting her off her feet despite her protests. Course I made it, she said when he set her down. Wouldn't miss this for anything. He introduced her to his teammates, young men who shook her hand with respect that seemed disproportionate to her introduction as just his mom. She noticed the way they looked at her, a certain attention in their eyes, as if they'd been briefed on something she wasn't aware of. One of them, a stocky kid with a New Jersey accent, held her gaze a beat too long. Ma'am, my dad wanted me to tell you something if I saw you today. He said to say thank you, and that Maria sends her love. Elena's breath caught. The kid's name tag read Hernandez, David's son. The family resemblance was unmistakable now that she was looking for it. Your father, she said carefully, is a good man. Hernandez Jr. smiled. He is, and he's told me a lot about people who made hard choices so guys like him could come home. Said I should always respect the folks who did the real work, even if no one knows their names. The message was clear. delivered with enough deniability to maintain operational security but enough specificity to be unmistakable. Elena nodded once. Your father sounds wise. Her son, oblivious to the subtext, clapped Hernandez on the shoulder. This guy saved my ass during Hell Week. I was about to ring out hypothermia, couldn't remember why I was there anymore. Hernandez literally carried me through the last evolution. Wouldn't let me quit. Hernandez shrugged. We don't leave people behind. That's the whole point of this thing. You learn it or you leave. Elena looked between the two young men, her son and the son of the man she'd saved, and felt the strange circularity of fate. They had no idea they were connected by more than training, that their families were linked by decisions made in the cockpit of a damaged warthog over a city they'd never heard of. I'm proud of you both, she said, and meant it completely. Her son grinned. Hey, there's a reception tonight at the Oak Club. Admiral Kavanaugh's thing. I know you wanted to head back, but would you stay? I'd really like you to be there. It's kind of a big deal. Elena pretended to consider it, then nodded. I can stay one more night, but I need to find a hotel first. Her son waved this off. Already handled. Admiral's office arranged rooms for families. They've got you at the Navy Lodge on base. Pretty nice, actually. Mom, this is weird, but I think the Admiral knows you somehow. He asked about you specifically, wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Elena kept her expression neutral. I served for 20 years. The military community is small. We probably crossed paths at some point. It was a reasonable explanation, enough to satisfy curiosity without inviting deeper questions. Her son accepted it easily, already distracted by another teammate calling his name. He kissed her cheek. Reception starts at 7. I'll meet you there. And Mom, thank you for coming. Dad would have been proud of this moment. I wish he could have seen it. The mention of Dmitri hit hard, as it always did. Elena touched her son's face, a brief maternal gesture that carried the weight of all the years of single parenting, all the nights she'd held him while he cried for a father who died in circumstances she could never fully explain. He is proud, she said softly. Wherever he is, he's watching and he's proud. I'm certain of it. Her son's eyes misted slightly, but he blinked it away, the emotional control already second nature. Love you, Mom. Then he was gone, swept back into the crowd of new SEALs, leaving Elena alone again. She walked to her car, a 15-year-old Subaru that had seen better days but ran reliably. Inside, she sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel and she stared at nothing, processing everything that had happened in the last hour. The tattoo on her forearm seemed to pulse with heat, though she knew that was psychosomatic. She pulled up her sleeve, looked at the faded ink. Unit designation. Operation number. The kind of tattoo that operators got when they were young and believed in permanence, before they learned that some things were meant to disappear. She'd gotten it done in Djibouti, 3 days after the Kismio mission, in a tiny shop run by a French expat who didn't ask questions. The other pilots in her unit had them too, different designs but same principle. Marks of belonging to something that officially didn't exist. Most of them had probably gotten them removed or covered up by now. Elena had kept hers, hidden under long sleeves and blazers, a secret reminder of the person she used to be. Or maybe the person she still was, just buried under layers of civilian life. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. Ms. Kovich, this is General Marsh's aide. The Admiral mentioned you might be attending this evening's reception. I'm confirming your attendance and arranging appropriate credentials. Please reply yes or no. Elena stared at the message. This was the moment. She could decline, drive away, return to the life she'd carefully constructed. Or she could step back into the world she'd left behind, the world that had defined her before it discarded her. She thought about her students, the kids who struggled with physics problems, who looked at her like she was just another teacher. She thought about the administrative meetings, the budget concerns, the petty politics of a public high school. She thought about the nights alone in her house, reading books and watching television, and trying not to think about the fact that she was 43 years old and had spent the last decade going through motions. Then she thought about the cockpit, about the feel of stick in her hand, the roar of the GAU-8, the crystal clarity that came from operating at the edge of capability. She thought about the person she'd been in that moment over Kismyo, making calculations that meant the difference between men living and dying. She thought about David Hernandez telling Maria he loved her, thinking those would be his last words. Alina typed one word, yes. She hit send before she could reconsider. The response came back within seconds. Excellent, see you at 1900. She started the car and drove to the Navy Lodge, checked in, went to her room. It was standard military lodging, clean and functional. She unpacked the small bag she'd brought, hung up the blazer she'd worn to the ceremony. In the bathroom mirror, she studied herself. 16 years had passed since Kismyo. Her hair had threads of gray now, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there. But her body was still fit, maintained through the discipline that never quite left military personnel. She could still run 6 miles without breathing hard, still did pull-ups every morning before work. The question wasn't whether she was physically capable. The question was whether she wanted to step back into the life she'd left. Teaching at Nellie's, training the next generation of combat pilots, would mean reactivating her clearances, undergoing reviews, possibly testifying about operations that were still sealed. It would mean living in Nevada, leaving the small life she'd built in Tucson. It would mean acknowledging, at least in classified spaces, that she was Viper 16, that the official record was a lie, that she'd done things that couldn't be spoken about openly. But it would also mean flying again. Maybe not combat, but close enough. It would mean being around people who understood what it meant to operate in the dark spaces where policy and reality diverged. It would mean using her skills for something more than teaching teenagers about velocity and acceleration. Alina sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, and thought about Dmitri. He'd been furious when she'd been sidelined, when the Air Force had made it clear that her continued service in combat roles was politically inconvenient. He'd wanted to fight it, to go public, to challenge the people who decided that decorated pilots could be sacrificed for diplomatic expediency. She'd talked him down, told him it wasn't worth the fight, that she'd served with honor and that was enough. But Dmitri had known she was lying, that every day she spent flying trainers in circles around a Texas airfield was a day she was being wasted. He'd seen the light go out in her eyes, the slow dimming that came from unfulfilled purpose. And then he died in Afghanistan, in an operation that officially never happened, leaving her alone with a teenage son and a pension, and a box of medals that couldn't be displayed publicly. "What would you tell me to do?" she asked the empty room, speaking to a ghost 16 years gone. The answer came not in words but in memory. Dmitri, the night before his last deployment, holding her face in his hands. "Don't let them make you small, Alina. Don't let them convince you that keeping your head down is the same as keeping your honor. You're a warrior. Act like one." She'd kissed him then, fierce and desperate, knowing the odds even if she couldn't admit them. 3 weeks later, she'd buried him in the rain at Arlington, standing at attention while they played taps and folded the flag. Alina stood, walked to the window, looked out at the base. Somewhere out there, her son was celebrating with his teammates, beginning a career that would take him to dark places and demand impossible things. He'd chosen this path knowing the risks, embracing them because he'd been raised by 2 people who believed that service mattered more than safety. She tried to steer him towards something easier, something that wouldn't keep her awake at night imagining all the ways he could die. But he'd been insistent, driven, following a legacy he didn't even fully understand. Maybe it was time to let him understand more of that legacy. Not everything, not the classified details, but the broader truth. That his mother wasn't just a teacher who used to wear a uniform. That she'd been in the fight, that she'd made decisions under pressure that had consequences measured in human lives. That the quiet woman who taught physics and made him breakfast had once flown into a sandstorm alone because men were dying and no one else would go. Would he be proud? Angry that she'd hidden it? Both. Alina didn't have answers, but she knew one thing. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending that the most meaningful part of her life had been a footnote. The tattoo on her arm burned again, phantom heat from phantom pressure. She looked at it one more time, then pulled her sleeve down. Tonight she would go to the reception. She would meet General Marsh. She would listen to what the Air Force wanted from her. And then she would decide whether Viper 16 was a call sign from the past or an identity that still had a future. At precisely 1900 hours, Alina walked into the officers' club wearing dark slacks and a white blouse, her hair down for once minimal makeup. She looked professional but not military, a deliberate choice that maintained ambiguity. The reception was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 40 people total, mostly senior officers and a handful of family members. Her son spotted her immediately and waved her over, but before she could reach him, Admiral Kavanaugh intercepted her smoothly. "Ms. Kovich, thank you for coming. Let me introduce you to General Marsh." The woman who turned to greet her was in her 50s, short gray hair, eyes that missed nothing. She wore her uniform with the ease of someone who'd spent decades in it, ribbons speaking to a career that had seen multiple deployments. She extended her hand and her grip was firm. "Alina Kovich, I've been hopping to meet you for a long time." Her voice was warm but carried authority, the kind that came from command rather than rank. Alina shook her hand, feeling evaluated. "General." "The Admiral mentioned you might have a proposition." Marsh smiled slightly. "Direct, I appreciate that. Let's step outside for a moment, shall we? I think we'll both prefer privacy for this conversation." They moved through the crowd, Alina catching her son's eye and giving him a small wave to indicate she'd be right back. Outside, on a patio overlooking the ocean, Marsh leaned against the railing and studied Alina in the fading light. "I'm going to be direct, too. I know who you are. I know about Kismio. I know about the other missions before and after that one. I know that you flew 27 combat sorties in A-10 Warthogs under operational parameters that technically violated international law. I know you saved, conservatively, 53 American lives in direct action and probably hundreds more through disrupted enemy operations. And I know the Air Force rewarded you with a desk job and a pat on the head." Alina's expression remained neutral, but her heart rate had kicked up. "That's quite a story, General. I'm not sure how to respond to it." Marsh's eyes narrowed slightly. "You can respond by being honest. I'm not here to threaten you or expose you. I'm here because I need someone with your skill set, your experience, and your willingness to operate in moral gray areas. I'm running a program at Nelly's that trains pilots for missions that exist in the space between official policy and operational necessity. We teach them how to make the kind of decisions you made over Kismio, how to fly into situations that doctrine says are impossible, how to come home when the odds say you shouldn't." The ocean wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and distance. Alina turned to face Marsh directly. "Why me? There are plenty of combat pilots with more recent experience, people who aren't retired, who haven't spent the last decade teaching high school." Marsh didn't hesitate. "Because you made the right choice when the wrong choice would have been easier. Because you went back when you could have left. Because you understood that rules and regulations exist to guide decisions, not to make them for you. That's what I need to teach. Not tactics, not procedures, judgment, the kind that can't be trained in a simulator." Alina absorbed this, weighing the words against her experience. "And if I say yes, what does that look like?" Marsh straightened, shifting into briefing mode. "You'd come to Nelly's as a senior instructor, civil service position, not military, so you don't have to worry about reactivating your commission. You'd work with pilots from multiple services, teaching advanced close air support and decision-making under pressure. You'd have access to classified materials related to your previous service, and we'd work with you to prepare cleared testimony for a review board that would examine the Kismio mission and others like it." The last part made Alina's stomach tight. "Testimony? I thought those missions were buried." Marsh's expression turned sympathetic. "They are, but times change, priorities shift. There's a movement within DoD to properly recognize personnel who have been erased from official records for political convenience. It's slow, it's classified, but it's happening. You'd be part of that process, not for public recognition, but for the record. So that someday, maybe 50 years from now, someone will know what you did." Alina looked out at the darkening ocean at the place where water met sky. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because men were dying. Marsh nodded. I know. That's exactly why you're the right person for this. You understand that service isn't about glory, but you also deserve to have your service acknowledged, even if that acknowledgement is limited to people with the right clearances. And more than that, you deserve to do work that matters. Real work. Work that uses what you're capable of instead of wasting it on lesson plans and grading papers. The words stung because they were true. Alina had told herself for years that teaching was important, that shaping young minds mattered, and it did, but it wasn't the same. It didn't require her to be more than a fraction of what she was capable of being. I have a life in Tucson, she said, but even to her own ears it sounded weak. Marsh pressed her advantage gently. You have a house in Tucson. You have a job you're overqualified for. But do you have a life? Do you wake up excited about your day? Do you feel like you're contributing at the level you're capable of? Alina's silence was answer enough. Marsh continued, her voice softening. I'm not judging. After I left Operational Command, I spent 2 years in a Pentagon desk job that nearly destroyed me. I understand what it's like to be underutilized. But I also know what it's like to find purpose again, to remember why you put on the uniform in the first place. This program I'm running, it's important. It might be the most important thing I've ever done. But I can't do it without people like you. People who have been there, who have made the hard calls, who can look young pilots in the eye and tell them what it really costs. Alina turned to face Marsh fully, studying her in the dim light. How long do I have to decide? Marsh smiled. Take a week, think about it. Talk to your son if you want, though I'd recommend keeping the classified details out of that conversation. But Alina, I'm not going to pressure you. This has to be your choice, made for your reasons. All I'm asking is that you consider it seriously. Consider what you want the next chapter of your life to look like. Consider whether hiding what you are is really the same as protecting yourself. The question landed like ordnance. Alina felt it detonate somewhere deep, shaking loose thoughts she tried to bury. Before she could respond, her son appeared at the patio door. Mom, you okay out here? She turned, smiled, the expression coming automatically. Fine, sweetheart, just talking with the general. He looked between them, sensing something but not understanding what. Okay, well, there are some people who want to meet you inside. Dad's old teammates. They heard you were here. This caught Alina off guard. Dimitri's teammates, her son nodded eagerly. Yeah, guys he served with in Afghanistan. They wanted to pay their respects, tell you some stories. I think you'll like them. He disappeared back inside, leaving Alina and Marsh alone again. The general's expression was knowing. Your husband was a good man. I never met him personally, but his reputation was solid. The kind of officer who took care of his people. Alina's voice was tight when she spoke. He died taking care of his people, leading from the front when he should have been coordinating from base. But that wasn't who he was. Marsh nodded slowly. The best ones never send anyone anywhere they wouldn't go themselves. It's what makes them great leaders and terrible actuarial risks. The observation was delivered with dark humor, the kind that only military personnel understood. Alina found herself smiling despite the pain. He would have liked you, General. He appreciated people who didn't bullshit. Marsh laughed, a genuine sound. Well then, let's go inside and I'll tell you stories about how the Air Force absolutely bullshitted your service record. They walked back into the reception together, and for the first time in 16 years, Alina felt like she was stepping back into a world that made sense. The evening progressed, and Alina found herself surrounded by men who'd served with Dimitri, who told stories that made her laugh and cry in equal measure. They spoke carefully, aware that some details remained classified, but the essence came through. Her husband had been respected, loved by his men, the kind of leader who'd made special operations what it was. More than that, they made it clear they knew about Alina, knew what she'd done, who she'd been. One of them, a grizzled master sergeant with scars that suggested a hard career, pulled her aside late in the evening. Ma'am, I just want you to know we've always known about Kismio, about the other missions. Your husband told us. Not details, nothing that would compromise anything, but enough. He was proud of you. So goddamn proud. He used to say you were the best pilot he'd ever seen, and he'd seen plenty. The words broke something in Alina, some dam she'd been maintaining through pure will. Tears came, silent and unstoppable. The sergeant, unfazed, simply stood beside her, a solid presence. He also said you probably spent years thinking you had to hide it, that you couldn't be proud of what you'd done because the Air Force made you invisible. But he wanted you to know, wanted us to tell you someday that you didn't have to hide. Not from the people who mattered. We know. We remember. And we're grateful. Alina wiped her eyes, managed a smile. Thank you, that means more than you know. The sergeant nodded, squeezed her shoulder once, and walked away. Alina stood alone for a moment, collecting herself, then felt a presence beside her. General Marsh, holding 2 glasses of wine. She offered one to Alina. Rough night. Alina accepted the glass, sipped it. Illuminating night. Marsh smiled. Good. Then maybe you're starting to see what I meant about acknowledgement. You don't need the public to know who you were. You just need the right people to know, the people who understand. We're your tribe, Alina. We always have been. The word tribe resonated. Alina looked around the room, at the officers and NCOs, at the families who'd sacrificed, at her son standing tall and proud among his new brothers. This was her tribe. This was where she belonged. Not in a high school faculty lounge, not in a suburban neighborhood where her neighbors knew nothing about the life she'd lived. Here, among people who'd seen darkness and chosen to go back into it anyway. I don't need a week, Alina said quietly. Marsh raised an eyebrow. No. Alina shook her head. I'll take the position. When do you need me at Nellie's? General Marsh's smile was wide and genuine. 2 weeks. That gives you time to wrap up your affairs in Tucson, pack, find housing. We'll help with the transition, make sure your clearances are reactivated smoothly. Alina, you're making the right choice. I promise you won't regret this. They shook hands, sealing the decision. Alina felt lightness she hadn't experienced in years, as if a weight she'd been carrying had suddenly lifted. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and introductions. She met pilots and operators, heard stories about operations and missions that would never be public knowledge. She felt herself coming alive again, synapses firing that had been dormant for too long. Late in the evening, her son found her again. Mom, you're different tonight, happier maybe. I don't know, you just seem more like yourself than I've seen in a long time. Alina pulled him into a hug, held him tight. I'm happy, proud of you, proud to be here, and I have some news. I'm taking a job teaching at Nellie's, Air Force Training Command. I'll be moving to Nevada in a couple weeks. Her son pulled back, eyes wide. Seriously, that's amazing. Will you be teaching pilots like you used to fly? The question was innocent, but it carried weight. Alina chose her words carefully. I'll be teaching advanced techniques to combat pilots, sharing experience, helping them prepare for the real world. It's important work. Her son's grin was enormous. That's so cool. I'm glad you're getting back to it. I always thought it was weird that you weren't still flying. You used to talk about it like it was everything to you. Alina's heart clenched. It was, but sometimes life takes you in different directions. The important thing is finding your way back when you get the chance. They talked for another hour about his training, about his future, about the possibilities ahead. Alina listened and advised, playing the mother role she'd perfected over years of single parenting. But beneath that, she felt the other parts of herself reawakening. The pilot, the tactician, the woman who'd made impossible decisions and lived with the consequences. That woman had been sleeping, but she wasn't dead. And now, finally, she was being called back to service. As the reception wound down and people began leaving, Admiral Kavanaugh found Alina one last time. I'm glad you're doing this. We need people like you in the pipeline, people who can teach the lessons that only come from having been there. Alina met his eyes. Thank you for recognizing me today, Admiral, for giving me this opportunity. I didn't realize how much I needed it until it was in front of me. Kavanaugh's expression was serious. We failed you 16 years ago. The Air Force failed you. I can't fix that, but I can try to make sure we don't waste what you have to offer now. Go to Nellie's. Teach these kids how to survive. Teach them how to make the hard calls. And know that every pilot you train, every life you help save through the knowledge you pass on, is a continuation of what you did over Kismyo. The words settled into Alina like a mission brief, clarifying purpose and objective. She nodded once, and then she left the officers' club with her son, walking out into the cool California night. Above them, stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light against the gathering darkness. Alina looked up at them, at the infinite sky that had once been her domain, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt ready, ready to fly again, even if it would be from the ground. Ready to be Viper 16 again, even if only in classified briefings and training scenarios. Ready to stop hiding the warrior she'd always been. 2 weeks later, Alina drove into Nellie's Air Force Base in Nevada, past security checkpoints that recognized her reactivated credentials, past flight lines where F-16s and F-22s sat ready. She reported to General Marsh's office in a building that smelled like every military building she'd ever been in, that particular combination of floor wax and purpose. Marsh greeted her warmly, walked her through the facilities, introduced her to other instructors. Most of them were former combat pilots, men and women who'd flown missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, all the modern battlefields. They welcomed her as one of their own, and several of them, she learned, knew exactly who she was. Word had spread quietly and through channels that Viper 16 was joining the team. Her first day teaching came 3 weeks into her tenure. She stood in front of a classroom of 20 pilots, all of them young, all of them confident in the way that people are before combat teaches them humility. She didn't introduce herself with her full background. She simply said, "I'm Alina Kovich. I flew A-10s in combat zones you can't ask about, and I'm here to teach you how to stay alive when everything goes wrong." One of the pilots, a cocky captain with more swagger than sense, raised his hand. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but A-10s are slow. What can you teach us about modern combat?" Alina smiled, a thin expression that didn't reach her eyes. "The A-10 is slow, you're right. It's also the aircraft that saved more American lives in close air support than any other platform. Speed is useful, Captain, but being in the right place at the right time matters more. Let me tell you about a mission in Somalia, 2007. She proceeded to walk them through Kismayo without nomming it, without violating classification, but with enough detail to make the reality vivid. She described flying into a sandstorm with zero visibility, making gun runs based on radio calls and memory, sustaining damage that should have ended the mission but continuing anyway. The classroom was silent when she finished. The cocky captain wasn't smiling anymore. "That was you?" he asked quietly. Alina nodded once. "That was me, and every decision I made that day was a calculation between American lives and acceptable risk. I chose to accept risks that doctrine says I shouldn't have. I'm not telling you to do the same. I'm telling you that someday you might face that choice, and when you do, no one can make it for you. You'll have seconds to decide, and you'll live with the consequences forever. My job is to help you think through those seconds before you're in them." From that day forward, Alina became known among the pilots at Nellie's as someone who didn't just teach tactics. She taught judgment. She created scenarios that had no clear right answer, situations where every choice had costs. She forced her students to articulate their reasoning, to defend their decisions, to understand that combat flying was as much about ethics as it was about skill. And slowly, word spread beyond Nellie's. Other bases requested her for workshops. She traveled to Langley, to Seymour Johnson, to Mountain Home, teaching classes of A-10 pilots who would eventually deploy to hostile skis. One evening, 6 months into her new position, Alina received a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Kovich." The voice on the other end was older, rough with age and cigarettes. "Captain Kovich, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, retired. We've never met officially, but I think you know who I am." Alina's hand tightened on the phone. "Webb, the pilot who'd taken credit for Kismayo." "Colonel, I'm surprised to hear from you." Webb's laugh was bitter. "I'm sure you are. Listen, I'm calling because I owe you an apology, a long overdue apology. I took credit for what you did. They offered me a DFC and I took it, even though I knew it wasn't earned. I've carried that for 16 years and it's eaten at me every single day." Alina sat down slowly, processing this. "Why are you calling now?" Webb sighed, the sound heavy with regret. Because I'm dying, lung cancer stage 4. I've got maybe 3 months and I wanted to clear my conscience before I go. What I did was wrong. You saved those men. You made the runs, took the damage, risked everything. And I let the Air Force give me credit because I was weak and ambitious. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it. For a long moment, Alina didn't speak. Then quietly she said, "Colonel, I appreciate the apology, but I didn't do it for credit. I did it because it was right. You taking the medal doesn't change that." Webb's voice cracked. "You're a better person than I am, better than I ever was. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're at Nellie's. I heard about it through the network. The kids there are lucky to have you. They're learning from someone who actually knows what the hell they're talking about." They spoke for a few more minutes, awkward but necessary, and then the call ended. Alina sat in her apartment, phone still in hand, feeling oddly at peace. Webb's apology didn't erase the injustice, but it acknowledged it. An acknowledgement, she was learning, mattered more than she'd realized. The months turned into years. Alina's reputation grew. She became the instructor that pilots requested specifically, the one whose lessons stuck because they came from real experience. She worked with General Marsh on the classified recognition program, testifying in sealed hearings about operations that officially never happened. The process was slow and bureaucratic, but eventually her record was amended. Not publicly, but in the secure files that mattered to the military community. Viper 16 was no longer erased. She existed in the official record, with commendations and citations that would remain classified for decades, but were nonetheless real. Her son completed his first deployment, came back changed in the ways that all combat veterans are changed. He visited Alina at Nellie's and she showed him around, introduced him to her colleagues. Over dinner one evening, he asked her directly, "Mom, some of the guys I served with, their fathers knew you. They talk about you like you're famous. What am I missing?" Alina looked at her son, saw Dmitri in his eyes, and made a decision. "I wasn't always a teacher. Before you were born, before I met your father, I flew combat missions that are still classified. I can't give you details, but I want you to know that the service I did mattered. It saved lives, and for a long time I had to pretend it didn't happen, but it did." Her son absorbed this, nodded slowly. "I knew there was something. The way people treat you, the respect in their eyes, it's the same respect they show combat vets." Alina smiled. "Because I am one just like you now. We're both warriors, even if we fought in different ways." Her son reached across the table, took her hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I wish you'd told me sooner." Alina squeezed his hand. "I wish I could have, but some things have their time. This is ours." Years continued to pass. Alina trained hundreds of pilots. Some of them went on to distinguished careers. Some of them died in combat, and she attended their funerals, bearing the weight of knowing she'd prepared them as best she could. She grew older, her hair fully gray now, but her mind remained sharp and her presence commanded respect. Younger instructors came to her for advice, and she gave it freely, passing on not just tactical knowledge but the wisdom that came from having lived a life in service. One afternoon, nearly a decade into her tenure at Nellie's, Alina received a package in the mail. Inside was a letter and a medal case. The letter was from the Secretary of the Air Force, and it informed her that she was being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, effective immediately. The citation, partially redacted, described actions taken over Somalia in 2007 that directly resulted in the preservation of American lives under extreme combat conditions. The award had been approved after extensive classified review, and while the full details would remain sealed, the recognition was now part of her official record. Alina held the medal, feeling its weight. She thought about the young pilot